The sound cuts through your soul like a blade, not just any bark, but the kind that makes seasoned cops freeze mid-step and mothers clutch their children closer. Marcus Hale knew that sound intimately after 23 years training K9 units across 3 states, and when it erupted from his sister's living room on that quiet Sunday afternoon, every nerve in his body fired at once. Echo, his retired German Shepherd partner, stood rigid as carved stone before a pink toy chest, muscles coiled like loaded springs, ears pinned back in primal alert. The growl that followed was ancient, territorial, deadly serious. The same sound Echo made seconds before finding that kidnapped girl buried beneath rotting floorboards in the Carolina mountains. The same warning he gave before uncovering improvised explosives in Afghan villages where children played in dusty streets. Marcus had learned to trust that bark with his life, and now it was telling him something was catastrophically wrong in his 6-year-old niece's bedroom. The afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains suddenly felt cold. The cheerful chaos of scattered dolls and coloring books transformed into something sinister. Sadie cowered behind the couch, tiny hands pressed against her ears, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed far too familiar, too practiced for a child who should know only safety within these walls. Jenny, his sister, emerged from the kitchen with forced laughter, dismissing the dog's behavior as overreaction to a mouse or squeaky toy, but Marcus caught the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided his gaze. Cal, Jenny's fiancé, leaned against the doorframe with calculated casualness, eyebrows raised in mock concern, asking if the dog was always this jumpy when off duty. But Marcus wasn't listening to words anymore. He was reading the room like a crime scene, noting Sadie's defensive posture, the way she instinctively positioned herself as far from Cal as possible, the fresh bruise on her forearm that everyone pretended not to see. Something was wrong here, something that made Echo's hackles rise and his training kick into overdrive, something that transformed a peaceful family Sunday into the opening act of a nightmare that would shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about the people he loved most. Marcus's hands trembled as he lifted the final layer of stuffed animals from the toy chest's bottom, following Echo's laser-focused stare to something that shouldn't exist. In any child's sanctuary, wrapped in medical gauze and carefully taped shut, nestled inside the hollow belly of a teddy bear like a mechanical heart, was a device no larger than a pack of gum, but infinitely more sinister, a hidden camera with a blinking red light that had been watching, recording, broadcasting God knows what, for God knows how long. The lens caught the afternoon light like a predator's eye, and in that crystalline moment of discovery, the entire foundation of what Marcus thought he knew about his family's life cracked and splintered. This wasn't random, wasn't some sick joke or discarded surveillance equipment from a previous owner. This was deliberate, sophisticated, placed with surgical precision by someone who knew exactly where a 6-year-old girl played, slept, changed clothes, and whispered her deepest fears into the darkness. Jenny's face drained of all color as she stared at the device in Marcus's palm, her carefully constructed explanations about garage sale, purchases crumbling like ash. Cal's casual demeanor evaporated, replaced by something calculating and dangerous that Marcus recognized from interrogation rooms and suspect lineups. But it was Sadie's reaction that shattered his heart completely. Not surprise, not confusion, but a weary resignation that suggested she had always known she was being watched, had been living under this invisible violation for so long that it had become her normal. Echo's growl deepened, his hackles rising as if, sensing that this discovery was only the beginning, that somewhere in the digital darkness, predators were already planning their next move. The camera's red light continued blinking like a countdown timer, and Marcus realized with growing horror that finding this device hadn't ended Sadie's nightmare. It had only revealed how deep the rabbit hole truly went, and how many monsters were still lurking in its depths, waiting for their chance to strike again when no one was watching except for one. Loyal German Shepherd, who refused to let evil hide in plain sight. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel K9 Loyal Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals' bravery you won't believe until you see it. In the world of law enforcement, there exists a sacred bond forged not in academy classrooms or courtroom testimonies, but in the split-second moments when instinct trumps training and loyalty becomes a matter of life and death. For over 2 decades, Marcus Hale had lived this reality, alongside some of the finest K9 officers ever to wear a badge, tracking fugitives through impossible terrain, detecting explosives that could level city blocks, and finding missing children when human searchers had given up hope. But nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for the case that would redefine everything he understood about protection, predation, and the extraordinary ability of a retired German shepherd to see evil that hides in plain sight. This is the story of Echo, a decorated police dog, whose final mission began not in a criminal's hideout or a terrorist's compound, but in the innocent pink-walled bedroom of a 6-year-old girl named Sadie, where the most sophisticated surveillance operation anyone could imagine was being conducted by monsters who had learned to weaponize trust itself. What started as a routine family visit on a peaceful Sunday afternoon would spiral into a federal investigation spanning multiple states, revealing a predator network so carefully constructed that it had operated undetected for years, capturing and distributing the most heinous content imaginable while hiding behind the facade of ordinary suburban life. The heroes of this story are not seasoned detectives or federal agents with unlimited resources, but a traumatized child finding her voice, an uncle willing to sacrifice everything to protect her, and a four-legged guardian whose instincts proved more reliable than any technology law enforcement could deploy. In a world where evil often masquerades as normalcy, where the people we trust most can become our greatest threats, and where innocence is bought and sold in digital marketplaces that operate beyond the reach of conventional justice, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. This case would challenge every assumption about family safety, force a reckoning with the price of willful blindness, and demonstrate that sometimes the most important witness in a courtroom walks on four legs and communicates through barks that cut through lies like searchlights piercing darkness. The investigation that followed would expose not just individual crimes, but systemic failures that allowed predators to operate with impunity, hidden cameras to broadcast live feeds to paying customers, and children to suffer in silence while the adults responsible for protecting them chose comfort over confrontation, denial over difficult truths. Every parent who watches this story will be forced to confront an uncomfortable reality that the greatest threats to our children often come not from strangers lurking in shadows, but from the people we invite into our homes, the partners we choose to trust, and the warning signs we choose to ignore because acknowledging them would shatter the illusion of safety we desperately need to believe. This is more than a crime story. It's a testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, proof that sometimes the most profound act of love is simply refusing to stay silent when something feels wrong, even when everyone around you insists that everything is perfectly normal. The house on Maple Street had always been Jenny's sanctuary, a modest 2-story colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch where she'd rebuilt her life after a devastating divorce that left her questioning every decision she'd ever made about love and trust. When Cal Rivers entered her world 18 months ago with his easy smile and patient way with Sadie, it felt like divine intervention, a second chance at the family stability she desperately craved. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, taught Sadie to ride her bike without training wheels, and never raised his voice even when she spilled juice on his laptop or forgot to feed her goldfish for 3 days straight. Jenny had finally allowed herself to believe that some fairy tales do come true, that broken hearts can heal, and that her daughter would grow up with a father figure who genuinely cared about her well-being. But on this particular Sunday afternoon, as Marcus watched Echo's behavior escalate from curious sniffing to full-scale alert mode, the carefully constructed narrative of their happy blended family began to crack like ice under pressure. The German Shepherd's training was too deeply ingrained, his instincts too finely tuned, his history of detecting hidden threats too extensive to dismiss his reaction as simple canine anxiety. When Echo planted himself in front of that pink toy chest and refused to move, despite Jenny's increasingly frantic attempts to call him away, Marcus felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline that preceded every major bust of his career. This was the same stance Echo took when he detected explosives wired beneath a school bus in Kandahar, the identical posture he assumed before uncovering the shallow grave where 3 missing teenagers had been buried by their abductor. There was something in that chest that didn't belong, something that triggered every alarm bell in a dog whose nose had been trained to identify threats that human senses couldn't detect. As Marcus knelt beside the toy chest and began methodically removing stuffed animals, plastic dolls, and coloring books, he noticed details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The way Sadie had immediately hidden behind the couch rather than expressing curiosity about Echo's strange behavior, the practiced ease with which she covered her ears as if she'd learned to block out sounds that no child should ever hear, and the almost rehearsed quality of Jenny's explanations that felt more like deflection than genuine confusion. Cal's presence in the doorway seemed less casual and more calculated with each passing moment, his questions about Echo's behavior carrying an undertone that suggested he knew exactly why the dog was agitated. When Marcus finally reached the bottom of the chest and his fingers closed around that teddy bear with its unnaturally heavy belly, he understood with crystalline clarity that this wasn't a family visit anymore. It was the beginning of an investigation that would tear apart everything his sister believed about the man she'd planned to marry and force him to confront the horrifying reality that predators don't always look like monsters. They sometimes look like the people we trust most to protect the ones we love. The hidden camera Marcus extracted from the teddy bear's belly was a masterpiece of miniaturization and malevolence, a device so sophisticated that it spoke to resources and technical expertise far beyond what any casual predator could access or afford. As he turned the tiny black object in his palm, studying its sleek construction and professional-grade components, Marcus realized they weren't dealing with some opportunistic creep who'd stumbled into child exploitation, but rather someone with connections to serious money, advanced technology, and possibly an entire network of individuals who specialized in this particular brand of evil. The device featured wireless transmission capabilities, night vision recording, motion activation, and most chillingly, a real-time streaming function that meant whatever had been captured in Sadie's bedroom hadn't just been stored locally. It had been broadcast live to unknown recipients who could be anywhere in the world. The camera's memory card contained weeks of footage that would later reveal the systematic nature of the abuse, documenting not just individual incidents, but a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological manipulation designed to ensure Sadie's silence while maximizing the content available for distribution. The technical analysis would eventually show that the device had been remotely accessed dozens of times by multiple IP addresses, suggesting a subscription-based service where paying customers could tune in to watch a 6-year-old girl's private moments on demand. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that this camera was just one node in a larger surveillance network that had been quietly recording children across multiple households, all coordinated through encrypted servers and dark web marketplaces that catered to the most depraved appetites imaginable. The sophistication of the operation became clear when investigators traced the device's digital fingerprint back through a maze of proxy servers, cryptocurrency transactions, and offshore hosting services that required federal resources to penetrate. This wasn't some isolated incident of abuse. It was part of an industrial-scale operation that treated children's suffering as a commodity to be packaged, marketed, and sold to the highest bidder. The camera's placement inside the teddy bear showed an intimate knowledge of Sadie's habits and preferences, suggesting that whoever installed it had spent considerable time observing her routines, learning her schedule, and identifying the optimal angle to capture the most compromising footage possible. Every technical detail painted a picture of predators who had turned child exploitation into a science, complete with market research, customer feedback systems, and quality control measures that ensured maximum profitability from maximum suffering. The encryption protocols were military-grade, the streaming quality was high definition, and the customer interface was as polished as any legitimate e-commerce platform, suggesting that somewhere in the digital underground there existed an entire economy built on the systematic abuse of children who had no idea they were being sold to strangers across the globe. The investigation would later reveal that this particular camera had generated thousands of dollars in subscription revenue over just a few months of operation, turning Sadie's bedroom into an unwitting broadcast studio for the entertainment of monsters who paid premium prices for access to her most vulnerable moments. That first night, after discovering the camera, Marcus transformed from visiting uncle into a one-man security force, setting up a defensive perimeter around the house that would have impressed his former military colleagues and terrified any rational person who understood what they were truly guarding against. He positioned himself in the hallway outside Sadie's bedroom with his service weapon within arm's reach, a tactical flashlight clipped to his belt, and Echo lying across the threshold like a furry sentinel. Programmed to detect threats that human senses might miss, the house settled into an uneasy quiet, punctuated by the occasional creak of old wood and the distant hum of traffic. But beneath that surface calm, Marcus could feel the electric tension of a family under siege, targeted by predators who might already be planning their next move. At 2:17 a.m., Echo's head snapped up from his resting position, ears rotating like radar dishes, picking up signals from the darkness beyond the windows, and the low growl that emerged from his throat was the same warning he'd given countless times in combat zones when enemy movement was detected beyond the perimeter. Marcus was instantly awake, weapon in hand, every nerve ending firing as he tried to identify the threat that had triggered his partner's alert response. The motion-activated security cameras he'd hastily installed around the property showed nothing initially, just empty yards bathed in the pale glow of street lamps and the occasional cat slinking between parked cars. But then at the edge of the backyard near the fence line that bordered the woods, a shadow moved with purpose rather than randomness, a human figure dressed in dark clothing who seemed to know exactly where the camera blind spots were located. This wasn't some random prowler or opportunistic burglar stumbling around in the darkness. This was someone conducting reconnaissance, mapping escape routes, and possibly testing the home's defenses to determine the best approach for a future incursion. The figure moved with the confidence of someone who had been watching this house for weeks or months, learning the family's routines, identifying weaknesses in their security, and waiting for the right moment to make their move. When Marcus slipped outside with Echo to investigate, the intruder vanished into the woods with a speed that suggested military or law enforcement training, leaving behind only footprints in the soft earth and the chilling realization that Sadie's ordeal was far from over. The predators knew their surveillance had been discovered, and now they were escalating their game plan into something far more dangerous than passive observation. Sleep became impossible after that encounter, as Marcus spent the remaining hours until dawn reinforcing entry points, checking sightlines from the surrounding trees, and trying to anticipate the next move in a chess game where his 6-year-old niece was the ultimate prize. The darkness felt alive with malevolent possibilities, every shadow potentially concealing another camera, another predator, another violation of the sanctuary that had already been irreparably compromised by evil masquerading as love and protection. The forensic analysis of the hidden camera's digital footprint unleashed a cascade of discoveries that transformed what Marcus initially believed was an isolated incident into evidence of a sprawling criminal enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 corporation and the ruthlessness of a cartel. Leo Martinez, Marcus's contact at the Atlanta Cybercrime Unit, worked through the night dissecting the device's encrypted data streams, following digital breadcrumbs through a labyrinth of proxy servers, cryptocurrency wallets, and darknet marketplaces that catered exclusively to the most depraved appetites of humanity's shadow economy. The camera hadn't just been recording Sadie's private moments, it had been broadcasting them live to a subscription service called Innocent Views that charged premium rates for access to real-time feeds from dozens of compromised households across the southeastern United States. The customer database revealed over 300 active subscribers who paid monthly fees ranging from $50 to $500 depending on their access level, with premium members receiving high-definition streams, interactive chat features, and the ability to request specific types of content from the children being exploited. But perhaps most chilling was the discovery of detailed psychological profiles compiled for each victim, complete with behavioral analysis, trauma responses, and customized manipulation strategies designed to maximize compliance while minimizing the risk of disclosure. Sadie's profile described her as highly responsive to authority figures and easily intimidated by threats to family members, suggesting that her abusers had been studying her reactions and refining their approach based on what generated the most fear and submission. The technical sophistication extended beyond simple surveillance into psychological warfare, with specialized software that analyzed vocal stress patterns, facial expressions, and body language to identify the most effective methods of control for each individual child. The operation employed child psychologists, former law enforcement officers, and technology specialists who had turned their expertise toward perfecting the systematic exploitation of innocence for profit. Credit card records linked to the subscription service revealed customers in 47 states and 12 countries, creating a global network of predators who shared techniques, traded access to victims, and collaborated on new methods of avoiding detection by authorities who were often years behind their technological capabilities. The investigation uncovered detailed records of recruitment strategies that involved identifying vulnerable, single mothers, cultivating romantic relationships with them, and gradually gaining access to their children through a process that could take months or years to complete. Each successful infiltration was documented with clinical precision, creating a playbook for predators that could be replicated across different geographic regions and demographic groups with devastating effectiveness. The encrypted video files recovered from the camera's memory card painted a portrait of systematic, psychological torture disguised as discipline, revealing Cal Rivers as a master manipulator who had weaponized Sadie's natural desire for approval and her fear of abandonment to create the perfect conditions for long-term abuse. The footage showed him entering her bedroom at calculated intervals, always when Jenny was asleep or away from the house, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected this routine through repetition and refinement. His voice on the recordings was barely above a whisper, creating an intimate atmosphere of shared secrets that made Sadie complicit in her own victimization by convincing her that their special relationship was something precious that must be protected from adults who wouldn't understand. The psychological conditioning was methodical and sophisticated, beginning with small violations of normal boundaries that gradually escalated into more serious abuse, while constantly reinforcing the narrative that Sadie was somehow responsible for triggering his behavior. He spoke to her like a therapist conducting sessions, asking probing questions about her emotions, her fears, and her relationships with other family members, then using that information to craft threats that specifically targeted her deepest anxieties about safety and belonging. The camera captured him positioning stuffed animals as witnesses to their interactions, creating a twisted theater where her beloved toys became silent accomplices to trauma that she was too young to understand, but old enough to internalize as shame. One particularly disturbing sequence showed him coaching her through elaborate explanations for bruises and behavioral changes, rehearsing conversations she might have with teachers or relatives who noticed something wrong, and rewarding her with small treats when she successfully delivered the scripted responses that would deflect suspicion. The timestamps revealed that these training sessions had been occurring 3 to 4 times per week for over 6 months, creating a parallel reality where Sadie lived under constant surveillance and threat while maintaining the facade of a normal childhood during daylight hours. But perhaps most damaging was the way Cal had poisoned her relationship with Echo, telling her repeatedly that the dog would be sent away forever if anyone discovered their secret, turning her greatest source of comfort into another source of anxiety and forcing her to choose between protecting herself and protecting the animal she loved most. The psychological manipulation extended to Jenny as well, with Cal systematically isolating Sadie from her mother through carefully orchestrated conflicts and misunderstandings that made communication increasingly difficult between them. He had created a prison of silence around a 6-year-old girl, using her own love and loyalty as bars that kept her trapped in a nightmare that she believed was somehow her fault and her responsibility to endure. The morning Cal disappeared marked the beginning of a manhunt that would span 3 states and reveal the true scope of a predator network that had been operating under the radar of law enforcement for years. Jenny discovered his absence at dawn when she found only an empty closet where his clothes had hung and a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter that read like the desperate words of a cornered animal. "Need time to think. Don't listen to Marcus. He's always hated me." The crude attempt at manipulation revealed the panic beneath Cal's carefully constructed facade, his final effort to plant seeds of doubt about Marcus's motives, even as the evidence of his own crimes mounted like an avalanche that would bury any hope of escape or denial. Detective Carter's team moved with military precision to freeze Cal's bank accounts, issue statewide alerts, and coordinate with federal agencies who had been tracking similar predator networks across the country, but Cal had vanished. With the thoroughness of someone who had always known this day might come and had prepared accordingly. His laptop was missing, along with external hard drives that likely contained terabytes of incriminating evidence, victim catalogs, and contact information for other predators in his network, who were probably already implementing their own escape plans as news of the investigation spread through encrypted communication channels. The FBI's analysis of Cal's digital footprint revealed a sophisticated understanding of counter-surveillance techniques, suggesting he had received training from someone with military or intelligence backgrounds who specialized in helping criminals evade capture by law enforcement agencies. His credit cards had been maxed out in the days before his disappearance, converting available credit into untraceable cash that could fund months of life on the run, while he accessed safe houses and false identities that predator networks maintained for exactly these situations. The investigation uncovered evidence that Cal had been systematically grooming Jenny for over 2 years before he ever met Sadie, studying her online dating profiles, learning about her financial struggles and emotional vulnerabilities, and crafting a persona specifically designed to exploit her desperate need for stability and companionship after her devastating divorce. Phone records revealed extensive communications with Thomas McKay, a registered sex offender who had been operating similar schemes across the southeastern United States, suggesting that Cal's infiltration of Jenny's family wasn't a crime of opportunity, but rather a calculated business decision made by predators who treated child exploitation as a renewable resource that could be harvested systematically across multiple households. The scope of their operation became clear when investigators discovered detailed maps marking the locations of single mothers in a 50-mile radius, complete with psychological profiles, financial information, and assessment scores that rated each potential target's vulnerability to romantic manipulation and likelihood of providing access to children who could be exploited for profit. The revelation that Thomas McKay had been actively involved in Sadie's exploitation transformed the investigation from a case of domestic abuse into a federal operation targeting an organized criminal enterprise that specialized in the systematic infiltration and exploitation of vulnerable families across multiple states. McKay's criminal history painted a chilling portrait of a predator who had refined his techniques through decades of evading capture, serving minimal sentences, and exploiting weaknesses in a justice system that consistently underestimated the sophistication and persistence of career child abusers. His previous convictions included charges for unlawful surveillance, possession of child exploitation materials, and conspiracy to commit sexual abuse, but each sentence had been relatively light due to plea bargains and overcrowded court dockets that prioritized violent crimes over what prosecutors often dismissed as victimless technology offenses. The FBI's analysis of McKay's recent activities revealed that he had been the technical architect behind the surveillance operation targeting Sadie, providing the sophisticated cameras, encrypted streaming infrastructure, and customer management systems that allowed Cal to monetize his access to her bedroom with industrial efficiency. Facial recognition software confirmed that McKay had been the hooded figure captured on the hidden camera weeks before Marcus discovered the device, conducting what appeared to be a maintenance visit to ensure optimal recording quality and proper camera positioning for maximum customer satisfaction. His presence in Sadie's bedroom while she slept represented a level of violation that went beyond anything Cal had achieved, suggesting that the premium subscribers to their service had been paying for content that included direct physical access to victims by multiple predators working in coordination. The investigation uncovered evidence that McKay maintained a workshop in an abandoned industrial facility where he modified commercially available surveillance equipment for use in child exploitation operations, creating custom devices that could be remotely controlled, automatically uploaded content to encrypted servers, and remained undetectable by standard electronic sweeps that parents might conduct if they suspected surveillance. His customer database contained detailed profiles of over 40 children across 7 states, suggesting that Sadie's case was just one node in a network that generated millions of dollars annually. Through subscription services, custom content creation, and the sale of access rights to premium customers who paid extraordinary amounts for the opportunity to participate directly in the abuse of specific children. The psychological profiles in McKay's files revealed a systematic approach to victim selection that targeted children from broken homes, single-parent households, and families experiencing financial stress with detailed recruitment strategies for identifying and grooming the adults who could provide access to potential victims. Most disturbing was the discovery of graduation protocols that described how children who aged out of the preferred demographic or became too aware of their exploitation were transitioned to other types of criminal operations, suggesting that escape from this network was virtually impossible once a child had been identified and catalogued in their system. The manhunt for Cal Rivers and Thomas McKay escalated into a multi-agency operation that deployed resources typically reserved for terrorism cases, as federal investigators realized they were pursuing predators whose technical sophistication and organizational structure posed a national security threat to children across multiple states. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit established a command center in Atlanta that coordinated with local law enforcement agencies, cybercrime specialists, and international partners who had been tracking similar networks operating in Europe and Asia, revealing that this case was connected to a global infrastructure of child exploitation that generated billions of dollars annually through subscription services, custom content creation, and the trafficking of access rights to premium customers. The investigation uncovered safe houses in rural Georgia, abandoned warehouses in South Carolina, and a sophisticated communication network that used gaming platforms and social media apps to coordinate operations while evading detection by traditional surveillance methods that law enforcement agencies relied upon to track criminal organizations. McKay's digital footprint revealed connections to hackers, money launderers, and technology specialists who provided the infrastructure necessary to operate streaming services that could handle thousands of simultaneous viewers while maintaining the encryption protocols that protected customer identities and financial transactions from detection by banking regulators and cybercrime investigators. The scope of the operation became clear when federal agents raided one of McKay's properties and discovered server farms that had been broadcasting live feeds from over 200 compromised households, creating a catalog of children who were being exploited without their families' knowledge by predators who had infiltrated their homes through romantic relationships, employment opportunities, and social connections that provided legitimate cover for their criminal activities. The investigation revealed that Cal had been just one operative in a network that recruited men with clean criminal records, attractive appearances, and convincing backstories to target single mothers who met specific demographic criteria that indicated vulnerability to manipulation and likelihood of providing long-term access to children who could be exploited for years without detection. Each successful infiltration followed a detailed playbook that included psychological profiling of targets, scripted conversation topics for dating apps, and systematic approaches to building trust while gradually isolating victims from friends and family members who might notice warning signs or ask uncomfortable questions about new relationships that progressed unusually quickly toward cohabitation and access to children. The financial records recovered from their operation showed that successful operatives like Cal could earn over $100,000 annually through a combination of subscription revenue sharing, custom content creation, and bonuses for recruiting new victims or maintaining long-term access to high-value targets whose exploitation generated premium subscriber rates from customers willing to pay extraordinary amounts for exclusive content featuring specific children. The courtroom fell into cathedral silence as 6-year-old Sadie approached the witness stand with Echo walking beside her, the German Shepherd's presence transforming what could have been a traumatic interrogation into a moment of quiet courage that would redefine how the justice system approached child testimony in cases involving sophisticated predator networks. Judge Patricia Hawkins had initially expressed concerns about allowing a therapy animal in her courtroom, but the unprecedented nature of the case and the clear evidence that Sadie's emotional stability depended entirely on Echo's presence convinced her to authorize the exception that would later become a model for courts across the country dealing with similar cases. The child advocacy specialist who had been working with Sadie for months had prepared her for this moment through countless practice sessions, but nothing could have prepared the adults in that courtroom for the clarity and precision with which she described her ordeal, speaking in the matter-of-fact tone that children use when discussing experiences that adults struggle to comprehend or accept. Her testimony began with simple questions about her daily routine, her relationship with her mother, and her feelings about Cal before the abuse began, establishing a baseline of normalcy that made the subsequent revelations all the more devastating for the jury members who found themselves confronting the reality that predators could operate for months within loving families without detection by caring adults who believed they were providing safety and stability for their children. When the prosecutor gently guided Sadie through the timeline of Cal's escalating behavior, her answers revealed the systematic nature of the psychological conditioning that had convinced her she was somehow responsible for triggering his anger and therefore obligated to accept his punishment as the natural consequence of her misbehavior. The most powerful moment came when she described Echo's reaction to the hidden camera, explaining in her small voice that the dog had been trying to tell the adults something important, but they hadn't understood his warnings until Uncle Marcus finally listened and looked where Echo was pointing, with his nose and his barks that sounded different from his normal sounds when he wanted to play or go outside. Her description of living under constant surveillance while pretending everything was normal revealed the exhausting burden of maintaining secrets that she didn't fully understand, carrying shame for things that weren't her fault, and protecting the adults around her from knowledge that she believed would somehow make everything worse if they discovered the truth about what happened when they weren't watching. The defense attorney's decision to waive cross-examination spoke volumes about the impossibility of challenging testimony that was both heartbreaking and unshakable, delivered by a child whose credibility was enhanced rather than undermined by her obvious trauma and her complete lack of guile or manipulation in recounting experiences that no child should ever have to endure or remember or describe to strangers in a formal setting designed for adult conflicts and adult concepts of justice and accountability. The final confrontation took place in an abandoned farmhouse outside Valdosta, Georgia, where Cal Rivers had been hiding for 3 weeks in conditions that spoke to the desperation of a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed into paranoia and isolation. Federal agents surrounded the property at dawn, using thermal imaging to confirm his location in the back bedroom, where he had barricaded himself with furniture and supplies that suggested he had been preparing for either a prolonged siege or a final standoff that would end with his death, rather than his capture. The tactical team approached with the methodical precision of soldiers clearing a hostile building, but it was Echo who provided the final confirmation that their target was indeed inside, his hackles rising and his low growl indicating the presence of the same predator whose scent had triggered his initial alert in Sadie's bedroom weeks earlier. When agents breached the door, they found Cal in a state of physical and psychological deterioration that reflected the toll of living as a fugitive, while knowing that his crimes had been exposed to a world that would never forgive or forget what he had done to an innocent child. The room was filled with burned documents, destroyed electronics, and empty bottles that suggested he had been attempting to erase evidence while self-medicating the anxiety of knowing that every law enforcement agency in the country was searching for him with resources and determination that made capture inevitable. His arrest was anticlimactic compared to the dramatic chase that had preceded it, with Cal offering no resistance as agents secured him and began the process of transporting him back to face charges that would likely result in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The search of his hiding place revealed additional evidence of the Predator network's scope, including coded communications with other operatives, financial records showing payments to accomplices across multiple states, and detailed plans for recruiting new victims that demonstrated the systematic nature of their criminal enterprise. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of what appeared to be a suicide note that blamed his victims for seducing him into criminal behavior, revealing the profound narcissism and moral bankruptcy that allowed predators like Cal to victimize children while maintaining the delusion that they were somehow the injured party in relationships built on manipulation, exploitation, and abuse. The psychological evaluation, conducted after his arrest, would later reveal a personality profile consistent with psychopathy, marked by a complete absence of empathy, an inability to accept responsibility for his actions, and a grandiose sense of entitlement that allowed him to justify the most heinous crimes as expressions of love or necessary discipline that his victims should have been grateful to receive from someone who understood their needs better than they did themselves. The investigation that began with Echo's Alert at a pink toy chest ultimately led to the dismantling of a predator network that had been operating across 17 states, with federal agents conducting simultaneous raids that resulted in the arrest of 43 individuals and the rescue of over 200 children who had been unknowingly exploited through sophisticated surveillance operations that turned their bedrooms into broadcast studios for the entertainment of paying customers around the world. The scope of Operation Silent Witness revealed the industrial scale of modern child exploitation, with server farms processing terabytes of content daily, cryptocurrency exchanges facilitating millions of dollars in transactions, and customer service departments that provided technical support to subscribers who experienced difficulties accessing their preferred content categories or requested specific types of performances from particular children. The financial records recovered from the operation showed annual revenues exceeding $50 million, with profit margins that rivaled legitimate technology companies and growth projections that treated child suffering as a renewable resource that could be harvested indefinitely through systematic recruitment of new victims and expansion into international markets, where law enforcement coordination was more difficult to achieve. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery that several of the network's most prolific operators were themselves parents who had been exploiting their own children while maintaining the facade of normal family life, attending school events and community activities while simultaneously managing online businesses that broadcast their children's most private moments to customers who paid premium rates for access to what they perceived as authentic family content. The investigation uncovered detailed training materials that taught recruited operatives how to identify vulnerable families, build trust with single mothers, and gradually normalize inappropriate behavior, while documenting everything for distribution through channels that operated with the sophistication of mainstream entertainment companies, complete with content ratings, customer reviews, and recommendation algorithms that suggested similar children based on subscriber viewing histories. The psychological impact assessments conducted on rescued children revealed patterns of trauma that would require years of specialized therapy to address, with many victims displaying symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative episodes, and attachment disorders that reflected the profound violation of trust they had experienced at the hands of adults who were supposed to protect them from exactly these types of predators. The network's recruitment strategies had specifically targeted children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, single-parent households, and families experiencing crisis situations that made them more susceptible to manipulation by predators who offered financial assistance, emotional support, and apparent stability while systematically documenting their crimes for profit. The international connections discovered during the investigation led to coordinated operations with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries, resulting in the shutdown of mirror networks that had been replicating the same business model across different cultural and legal jurisdictions where penalties for child exploitation were often less severe than those in the United States. 3 years after that Sunday afternoon, when a retired German shepherd's bark shattered the illusion of safety in a suburban home, the ripple effects of Echo's discovery continue to transform how law enforcement approaches cases involving sophisticated predator networks and how communities protect their most vulnerable members from threats that masquerade as love, stability, and protection. The legislation passed in Sadie's name has mandated specialized training for family court judges, child protective services workers, and law enforcement officers who investigate cases where technology has been weaponized against children, ensuring that future victims will have advocates who understand the complexity of modern exploitation and the sophisticated methods predators use to evade detection while maintaining access to their targets. Echo himself lived only 18 months after the trial, succumbing to the cancer that had been silently growing in his bones, while he focused his remaining energy on protecting the little girl who had become the center of his universe. But his legacy extends far beyond the specific crimes he helped expose to encompass a fundamental shift in how society recognizes and responds to the warning signs that children display when they are suffering in silence. The Echo Protocol, now implemented in police departments across 37 states, requires investigators to pay special attention to animal behavior during domestic investigations, recognizing that trained dogs often detect threats that human senses miss, and that their alerts should be treated as credible evidence rather than dismissed as irrelevant distractions from more conventional investigative techniques. Sadie, now 9 years old and thriving in Marcus's care, has become an unexpected advocate for other children who have survived similar ordeals, speaking at conferences and training sessions where her quiet courage reminds adults that children are far more resilient and perceptive than we often give them credit for, and that their voices deserve to be heard even when what they have to say challenges our assumptions about safety, family, and the people we trust with our most precious responsibilities. The foundation established in Echo's memory has funded the training of over 300 therapy dogs who work specifically with child victims of exploitation, providing the same kind of unconditional support and protection that allowed Sadie to find her voice and speak truth to power in a courtroom where justice finally prevailed over the carefully constructed lies that had imprisoned her in silence and shame. Perhaps most importantly, this case has forced a national conversation about the uncomfortable reality that the greatest threats to children often come not from strangers lurking in shadows, but from the people we invite into our homes, trust with our secrets, and allow to become integral parts of our families, without questioning whether their motives align with our naive assumptions about human nature and the boundaries that should exist between adults and the children placed in their care. The question that haunts every parent who learns about Sadie's story is not whether such predators exist, but whether we would recognize the warning signs if our own children were trying to tell us that something was terribly wrong with someone we had chosen to trust, and whether we would have the courage to listen to uncomfortable truths rather than embrace comfortable lies that preserve our illusions about safety and security in a world where evil often wears familiar faces and speaks in gentle voices that promise protection while delivering devastation. And have you ever witnessed any heroic animal act? Tell us your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.